Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Let's Have a Conversation. I am your host, Elizabeth Fortner, and I am the Outreach and Marketing Specialist for the Education for Children and Youth Experiencing Homelessness program here in Region 3, or as we like to say, heck yeah. So our podcast raise awareness for and promote education for various topics that are related to the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act and educational stability for youth in foster care. And on today's episode, we are speaking with Wendy Dunlap. And Wendy is a higher education access partner with PHEAA. And her current role at PHEAA focuses on creating access to higher education. She works with financial aid administrators, counselors at secondary schools, legislators and their staff, and staff from many community organizations within Pennsylvania. She has been with PHEAA for 17 years, and before working at PHEAA, she spent 15 years working in financial aid at several universities. And PHEAA's mission is to provide affordable access to higher education. So we are now thrilled to introduce Wendy Dunlap. Welcome, Wendy. So Wendy,
Thank you. I
yes,
appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Of course.
So PHEAA is a fairly large organization. Of course, our mission is to make higher education affordable for Pennsylvania families and students. My team is the Pennsylvania School Services team. There are 13 higher education access partners, including myself. And we're assigned different regions of the state. And we work closely with folks that are at the secondary level as far as school counselors. We work with financial aid staff and others at the post-secondary level. We work with legislators and lots of different community organizations that advocate and mentor students. So we have a full plate of things that we're doing at all times. We really work hard to make sure that students in Pennsylvania are applying for all types of financial aid that may be available to them. And that includes federal aid, the state programs we administer at PHEAA, like the Pennsylvania State Grant, as well as programs from the schools themselves. So on a given day, I might be, doing a FAFSA workshop at a high school, or I might be at a high school talking to a personal finance class about how to find a school and get your best financial fit or search for scholarships. Or maybe I'm sitting down with someone at a post-secondary school and helping them understand how one of our financial aid programs works. Or assisting a legislator, giving them a big overview of what's out there for students. They can, better advocate. So my team does a lot of things. We have a lot of challenges, but I think all of us enjoy most how we can advocate for students and, the one-on-one time we have with students and families to make sure that they can meet their goals.
Wow. And I'm meeting with all of you next week, right? It's all 13 of you? Yes, on Wednesday.
Yes,
so
yes.
I'm very excited to meet your team.
Yes, yes. So I'm located in Western Pennsylvania, but you'll get to meet folks from across the state.
Yeah.
First started, professionally, I was interested in working in a career where I could help people. There's always that part of me that wherever I'm working or whatever I'm doing, I want to be of assistance to people, because at the end of the day, you want to feel like you've accomplished something, that you've, contributed something positive. So that's what I enjoy most about working in financial aid, whether that's working at a university or working at PHEAA, having that opportunity to do so. Actually, my first job out of college was working at a nonprofit with families that were seeking either Head Start or opportunities for daycare for their children. So that kind of set me in motion with working in that field of education. And again, that was because I have that interest in helping folks out. So it's been really empowering to have this job to help other students, attain their goals. I really appreciate having this opportunity.
Yeah, well, we appreciate having you.
we need to have a better understanding so that we can advise the student properly on what their next steps are. So if a student identifies themselves as being an unaccompanied homeless youth, let's say at the high school level, if the high school has designated them as such, that kind of makes our job easy in financial aid because we know what route to take them at that point. We can say, okay, you've been designated by your high school. When you complete the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, you'll be able to check a box there to indicate that you meet that status. And that means you won't have to put any information on the application about your parents. You'll be automatically independent. But I think the hard part of that conversation is first we need to make sure they're identified. And I know you know that sometimes that's really difficult. And from school district to school district, there's often a different person they need to connect with to make sure they are identified and they know what the instructions are as far as what to do next. If a student doesn't share their situation and doesn't, provide that information, they won't get that information about, hey, I can fill out the FAFSA without parental information. That it's going to work for me. So it's really, really important to have that open line of communication with your students to understand, what their situation is. I know that's really difficult, especially at some larger high schools where you don't necessarily know every student and what's going on.
Right.
So for a high school student, typically that's what we see happen. I'll get a phone call sometimes from a counselor at a high school and they'll say, hey, this is the student situation. What do we do next? And we can, move them through that process. But at the high school level, it's definitely difficult sometimes to even identify that that's the student's situation. They've got to share that.
One of the financial aid counselors I spoke with mentioned that he would really appreciate, knowing ahead of time that there's a student interested in pursuing that college. That way they can reach admissions and kind of already get everything they need to get and start getting financial aid, because it can be a process, the verification letter and everything else that needs to be done, but in order to smoothly transition them into higher ed.
And once they're there, then they still need some additional support.
Oh,
For
yes.
example, last weekend I was helping out at a local college. We did a FAFSA workshop for their students. And there was a student that came in and she was working on her student section of the FAFSA for 24-25. And she said to me, well, I'm checking it over, but it seemed like it was really short. And I was like, well, let's see what you answered. And she had checked yes to the homeless item. And I always double check to make sure that they meant to check that, because sometimes they'll check it by accident or they don't read it thoroughly. And I said, okay, you've checked this item here. And she said, well, yeah. She's like, sometimes I stay at all different places, but she wouldn't say I'm a homeless unaccompanied youth, which is usually what happens. Students don't say this is the label I have. They just explain their experience. I was like, okay, yeah. I'm like, do you think you checked that last year? And she's like, I think so, but I'm not sure. But luckily, I had the financial aid staff from that college there with me. So I called one of them over so they could have a conversation. And they recognized her, and it's a smaller school, so they have a little bit more opportunity to do that. And they're like, oh, yeah, and they kind of worked through and said, yeah, I'll check in the office to make sure we have everything we need. So that worked out really well. So that was a really lucky situation that we were able to, kind of smooth out all the bumps and make sure things were in place for the next year. So it continues to be where they need a little bit additional support. So they make sure that they continue to identify themselves properly when they're applying for financial aid and getting what they need so they can graduate.
Yeah. And I understand that it's hard to identify as experiencing homelessness if you haven't already been identified under McKinney-Vento because of that stigma, or maybe just they don't want no one to know, what they're experiencing.
Yes.
But what I want to encourage these students is like, I understand, when I was in college, I was just getting out of the foster care system. And so thankfully I was able to complete the FAFSA and I could check off that I was in foster care. So everything was kind of smooth sailing from there. But I then realized once I got to campus, I have no resources that I need. So
Yeah.
I knew no one just knows you're a foster kid, or no one knows that you're experiencing homelessness or that you're unaccompanied and you have nowhere to go. But now, I had to voice, and not many can do this, and that's okay. I respect that. If you don't want to disclose your information, don't. Me, I was always open book. I would Now it took a while. I wasn't always like that, but when I got to college, I knew that, well, now if I need this assistance, I'm going to have to disclose something. And so, come
Mhm.
winter break, I didn't know that the campus shuts down.
Yeah.
No one taught you that. No one told you that. Like, hey, Liz, make sure you have a place to live because campus closes for winter break and summer and spring break. So I was like, oh no, I don't know where I'm going to be able to go. And so at that
Yeah.
moment, I had to go to resident life and say, hey, I was a foster kid. And fortunately, I know for winter break we have to leave, but I don't have anywhere to go. Is there any way I could stay on campus? And thankfully, they were able to allow me the whole 4 years to stay on campus, summer, winter break, spring break. And now I'm starting to see that many of our colleges in PA are offering year-round housing. And I think that's great.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage these students to advocate for themselves.
And usually at most schools, whether it's a career school or a college, if you identify with the financial aid office and say, I'm having some barriers I'm concerned about before you even attend, they're a good place to get you connected with other areas on campus that can help you out.
Yeah.
So they're really concerned about a student having their basic needs met, and they usually have connections on campus to get that student, what they possibly need. So that's a good starting point. There are admissions. So definitely we want to make sure that students are voicing that information. I do know that there are some students that just won't. They won't share that information, and often they share it when it's too late, when they're in academic trouble because they haven't had their needs met and they're not able to be successful in the classroom. And that's just really difficult because maybe there were some things that could have supported them so they could be more successful.
Because when I transitioned into college, I didn't have that warm handoff. So it was super scary. So I
Mhm.
can only imagine for any student who's going on to college, it's like, okay, what do I do now? You're on your own. And some people
Yes.
love the
Yeah.
independence, but some people are also scared. And, it would be nice if, you know, before I got to college that, whoever I worked with, my guidance counselor, already made a connection with someone at that campus and said, all right, Liz, you're going to be meeting with so and
Yeah.
so. They're familiar with your situation. And now I have somebody on campus that I can target every time. And although I didn't have
Yeah.
that, I made one. She was my advisor my
Yeah.
freshman year, but she became my person for the next 4 years, because she was that one person that I could disclose everything to, and she could connect me to different resources. So I,
Yes.
I think that's
Yes. And
important.
students need that.
Yes, absolutely. So I
Yeah.
think that's really important and that's why I'm happy that now, with the fostering independence, which we'll get into, they appointed a point of contact.
So every school in Pennsylvania has to have a point of contact for students that would have been in the foster system and meet the qualifications to participate in our foster education program. So on the website, it has to be promoted who that point of contact is for that school. Also, on a lot of the school's websites, when they provide that information about the point of contact, they also list a lot of other services and support that's provided. So if someone were looking at that page and they're saying, well, I don't fall into that category of having been in foster care, but I need these services, they would still gain some information about those there. So it's a good place to look. Um, Often you'll find that information connected to the admissions portion of the website. Sometimes it's connected to financial aid, but usually it's addressing, basic needs that the student would have and who to get in touch with as far as the point of contact to make sure they have the things they need and they understand what they have to do as a student as well. So that point of contact is really important. We encourage schools to update the point of contact whenever needed, because we want to make sure that that information is available to a student that needs to get in touch with someone at the school. So they're not thinking, well, who did I feel comfortable talking to, or I haven't talked to anyone. How do I share this information? They just know, hey, there's a point of contact for me. So students that have been in foster care through the age of 16 or at the age of 16 can qualify for the federal PHEAA grant, which is federal funding to assist them with their costs. But here in Pennsylvania, we have an additional program that we sometimes call foster ed for short, but it is that fostering independence education waiver program. So a student under that foster ed program here in Pennsylvania, they should have their tuition and fees fully covered. So if a student has applied for financial aid, which they need to do, and they've received some assistance through PHEAA or other types of grants, first that would go towards those tuition and fees. Anything that's left over after those other grants and or scholarships are applied, the school is required to cover so that the student's tuition and fees are fully covered. Now, there are other expenses, of course, to go to school, like living on campus, books and supplies. Foster ed doesn't cover that, although there are some schools that will provide additional resources to students. And their other financial aid could kick in and help out with those things.
Right.
So if they're receiving student loans, for example, that could help out with those other expenses. So each school can provide information to the student about their financial aid offer and how that waiver will work for them and what might be remaining that they need to be concerned about.
Now,
and of course, every student situation is going to be a little different, based on where they're living. If they're attending a school that offers on-campus housing, or maybe they're going to a community college and they're residing in an apartment. So it's really good for them to talk to financial aid about how that waiver is going to work and what it looks like financially for them.
Right. So is the foster ed only for state, or does that work for private as well? Like private institutions?
For all schools in Pennsylvania. So it would be private as well. So if I'm looking at a private college, it would work there too. So either way, or a community college. So it would have to be a school in Pennsylvania though for foster ed.
Right.
So if they're looking at out of state, they can still receive PHEAA, but foster ed won't cross the PA borders. So for the student that's a homeless youth, PHEAA and foster ed would not be an option because they're specifically for students that have been in the foster care system. But for students that are homeless youth, they're going to fill out the FAFSA just like any other student, just like the student who's homeless unaccompanied youth as their status. They're going to complete that FAFSA and they'll be able to check the box to say that they meet the requirements to be an unaccompanied homeless youth. They'll submit that application. They'll be considered independent on the application. There's a good chance their school and also PHEAA will want to verify their status to double check that they checked that correctly. And then they'll be considered for, all types of financial aid, whether that's federal grants, like a federal Pell Grant, the Pennsylvania State Grant, grants from the school itself, work study, and student loans. So just like any student, they're applying for financial aid and they're waiting to see what their financial aid offer is and looking to see what's their best financial fit. So we really want to encourage all students, whether their status is, homeless youth, or if they're saying, okay, I was in foster care and I'm going to be eligible for these programs, to look at a variety of schools and compare, financially, what's the best situation for them, as well as where they're going to get the most support so they can be successful. Right. And that's really where, someone that can advocate for them, mentor them, can really be helpful. Because sometimes a student might say, well, I'm just going to look at this one school. I think that's a fit for me. And they may not realize that maybe there's a few others that will work out financially to be more beneficial as well as academically a better fit.
Sure.
So again, if we can, mentor and advise students to do a little shopping to figure out what's going to work, does the school offer, housing during breaks, like you said? Financially, is it going to work for them so they don't have to borrow a lot in student loans? What are some opportunities that exist there for them academically to make sure they're going to get into the job they want to, after they graduate? Those are a lot of questions to ask. And it's a lot to ask of our students sometimes to answer all of those, right out of high school.
Right.
So it is
Yes.
really great if there's someone to help them with that.
Me, I went for a private school, not realizing, Liz, you're going to have to pay that back. And I did not shop around, because if I did, I would have chose a state school. But I don't regret my choice at all. I just, student loans.
Oh.
Everyone loves it. Wendy, you mentioned about verifying. So what exactly needs to be in that letter in order for them to verify their status?
It's important to understand first who you're verifying it for and what they're asking for. I know that some universities will say, well, we have a specific form that we want someone to fill out to verify, where other schools may say, we just need a letter on, for example, letterhead from your high school, if your counselor at the high school is going to verify that. At PHEAA, for example, we just need the high school counselor to provide that information on letterhead. We're pretty general in terms of what we need. But some other schools are much more specific. So if the student has gotten that request already from the school, it should outline, what they're looking for. If there's some confusion there, I may reach back out before I ask for that letter from someone, just to make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to.
Mhm.
And again, that's where, that point of contact that they may have can help them out with that. For the homeless youth, they don't have an official point of contact, but someone that they may have in the financial aid office that they're working with can assist them and give them a little more information about, what should be included.
Yeah. Okay.
It
Yeah,
usually
'cause
always needs a signature. That's a big deal. Sometimes,
yes.
it's funny, but sometimes things will come back and it doesn't have a signature. It's like, oh, wait, we can't really use that. And keep
Yeah.
in mind, for a school like a university or a college or a trade school, for financial aid, they're, overseen by the federal government and they have to go through audits and reviews.
Of course.
So if they said, oh yeah, we accepted the student status and it's questionable, there's some conflicting information maybe that they have in the student's file about their status, that's where they get in trouble, they get fined. So
Right.
sometimes we have to kind of look at it from that other perspective. Yes, we're creating barriers by creating this request, but in order to get money to these students, we have to
have
continue
it,
to meet the
right.
requirements of the
And we
program.
all understand. We all get
Yeah.
audited and monitored, and you got to do what you got to do. And okay. So yeah, I didn't know how that worked when I checked off that box. I'm like, did I have to get a verification letter from my school district? But I don't remember. All right. So
Yeah, so if you're someone that would meet that criteria, you not only need to do the FAFSA, you need to fill out that application for the Chafee grant, and you need to do so by the deadline to make sure
yeah.
you can be considered for those funds.
Yeah. And now when is the deadline for this year? For
24-25, the application isn't available yet. So
okay.
we'll just hold off announcing that until the application comes out. But
Gotcha.
usually it has a pretty long application period. They're pretty generous with that. So students should be, working on that once it becomes available. They only need to fill it out once during their academic career. We'll just
Okay.
continue to use that initial application as they go through their years of school.
And what about FAFSA? That's up now, right?
FAFSA is available now. They
Yeah.
need to do that every year. And the 24-25 FAFSA has been a little challenging. We've talked about this a bit.
Yes.
Yeah, it came out late and there's been some issues with the application. So we're seeing some students that are having trouble getting through completing the application. And that's really concerning because we don't want them to say, oh, I, need to take a gap year just because I can't fill out the FAFSA.
Yeah.
So we really want to, connect them with, one of our access partners at PHEAA with the staff at the post-secondary schools to get them assistance so they can get that application in.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you kind of diving into the financial piece of higher ed. I think that's a big, big barrier, if not the biggest. I mean, don't get me wrong. I
Yeah.
think all barriers are really huge, especially it depends, it varies person to person. But I know financial aid is usually the biggest one when you want to go to college, who's going to pay for it?
Yeah.
So the importance of collaboration. So it's like, okay, I want to make everyone's job easier. Not always realistic,
Yeah.
but that's why it's very important to collaborate.
I think what's really going to help you as you attempt to do this is there's been a big focus on collegiate basic needs. I know PDE is working on that right now as a plan and how to best meet all students' basic needs. So I think that conversation helps with those particular populations that you're talking about and paying attention to all the things that students need to be successful. So it's a good time to, reach out and talk to folks about advocating for those students. If we can connect people, that's really the top priority here. How can we connect students to who they need to talk to get those needs met? So, for example, understanding who the point of contact is for those students that meet the criteria to participate in the foster ed program at each of the schools that you're working with in terms of higher ed, that'll be really helpful. Maybe I'm a liaison that I'm working with students and I see a lot of my students go to this particular school. If I can work out a connection with that college or trade school's point of contact, maybe that makes it more seamless, to get information back and forth. So, just introducing yourself to say, I work with some students in our region. I know a number of them are interested in your school. I see that you're the point of contact. Could we just, take 10 minutes to chat? I know it's real crazy right now with the FAFSA season and what's going on with the application. But even more so, I'm really concerned about the students that I'm working with. Can, I share some information about who might be coming to your school?
That's
And
a
I
great
think
idea.
people will appreciate that.
Yeah, about the
Yeah.
students who are interested. I think that's a great idea. And sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and if you're like, I'm not sure, I can't find this person, or they're not, reaching back out to me. If you want to reach out to the higher education access partner in your region from PHEAA, we can often connect you with someone in the financial aid office that we feel might be a good person for you to talk to and recommend, chat with this person.
Oh,
that's
great to know.
Yeah, the point of contact isn't always someone in the financial aid office. Sometimes it's in another area. So if you have something that's really specific to financial aid, we can help you out with getting that person you need.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know.
We do a yearly workshop every fall for educators, and that's in person or virtual. So anyone that's working in the field of, advocating and working with students can attend those for free. Those will take place in September. So that's a great way to learn more about financial aid and, ask questions that you might have about the students you're working with.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
And they take place in September, and we host those throughout the state of Pennsylvania, as well as we offer a few virtually too. So you can come in person or attend virtually. It's usually a full morning from like 9 to 12. We present at the workshops, the higher education access partners from PHEAA, and we also have someone from a post-secondary school, a college, a university, or a trade school that co-presents with us. So you get both viewpoints about the application process for financial aid and about the many programs that are available. So that's a great opportunity for school counselors, for educators that are working for different organizations that are mentoring students, or for those of you that, touch upon financial aid, but maybe work in another field helping students, but would like to know more. So those are available, to register for in the fall. We just put our dates together for this coming September. So I can share a flyer with you, Elizabeth, so you know when those are coming up. And we always look forward to hosting those. It's a great way to get folks together, and it's really good networking opportunities. So you can talk to other people, within our community that advocate for students. And, maybe you meet someone that you've seen like on a letter or something. You get to see them in person. If you come to, one of the workshops, and, ask them a little bit more and share some experiences. The biggest thing is deadlines. And that's really hard because if you have a student that their biggest worry isn't about when they get their financial aid application in, they're more apt to miss a deadline. And maybe sometimes they put the application off because they're not sure how to fill it out.
Yeah.
If you miss a deadline, you miss out on money. Having worked with students for so long in my career, I have, as I'm saying this, I can see pictures in my mind of the faces of students that I've talked to that they've missed out on receiving a Pennsylvania state grant, which can be a large sum of money, simply because they filled out the application, a week or a month too late. So we really need to encourage them to understand that deadlines are really important and we don't want to miss out on opportunities.
For sure.
And that's something that, all of us that advocate students and talk to students frequently can, keep reminding them about. Make sure you're doing things on time. You need to, stay on top of these things, not just applying for admission, but also, applying for financial aid, applying for things like housing, because housing is so important to some of these students we're speaking about. All those little things really add up. And if you miss out on something, it makes it so much harder to get the accommodations that you need.
Wendy, I will see you next week. So I am excited about that. And we had you for a lunch and learn. And I got to say, I am so happy you did that and Wendy, I thank you for all that you do. And you worked in financial aid and now you work with PHEAA. I'm so glad that I met you, especially at the PHEAA conference. And now that we have that good relationship. Yes. So with that message, we're going to close our episode of Let's Have a Conversation. And again, I want to thank you, Wendy, for being with us today as our guest.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And thank you again, everyone, for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and please join us again next month.
Thank you.